Okay, so we're going to look at the rock, paper, scissors game. I'm not really here to talk about the code design, that's in the presentation, but just to put it here on the front of actually writing the code. Basic game is computer chooses rock, paper or scissors. The user is prompted to choose rock, paper or scissors. Computer then looks at the two and see who's won, and basically keeps going round and round and round. Each time the computer wins, i.e. the player loses, they lose a life. They start with 5 lives, and if they get down to 0 lives, that's it. The game is over. So that's the basic code design for the program. How did we design it? We looked at all the individual tasks that needed to be done. So again, this is all in the presentation on actually designing this code. We put them into a sequence, so we decided what order we needed things to be done in. We looked at all of those tasks. We looked at how the loop needs to work and discovered we're actually going to be using a while loop for that. So it's not quite as per the diagram here. So we introduced the concept of while loops. We looked at all the data that needed to be passed in, all the arguments that needed to be passed in, or parameters passed into the functions, and we looked at what the functions were going to be producing. So that was the design of our code. What we're at now is a point of actually writing this code and getting it to work, and this is our first iteration at it to get up all the functions and get our main function driving it all. So that's the point we're about to start at now. Okay, so the first function we want to generate or write is this computer's random choice. It's got to choose between rock, paper and scissors, so we need to do that first. So let's go on and define a function called random choice. And what's our random choice function going to need as parameters? Well, it doesn't need any parameters going in. It now needs to choose a random number between 0 and 2. So I'm just going to call this ran choice. Here's assign random between 0 and 2. Okay, so that's pretty straightforward. And just to check that it works, I'm just going to print rand choice for now. And that should work. So I'm not returning anything at the moment, I'm not worried about that. Obviously I've used a rand int function, so I need to import that. So from random import rand int, and obviously I need my main function, and at the moment I'm just going to call random choice a few times just to see what it does, see if it seems to do what we're expecting it to do. So maybe we should do it 4 times. I need to call my main function down the bottom there. Okay, so there's my first bit of code. Let's run that, see what happens. Invalid syntax. Great start. Might have to go to the def main there. Run that. Okay, so 2 1 2 1. So it looks like it's printed a few. It's obviously not chosen the a 0 there. It looks like 0 and 1. Maybe I'll just run it again, just in case that was an issue. Oh yeah, I've got some zeros. So the basic function seems to be generating these random numbers. Now I don't want it returning random numbers. I want it to be returning rock, paper or scissors, depending what the choice was. So I can quite easily now go into here and say if ran choice is equal to 0, so I've made the choice that that's going to be my rock. I'm going to return string rock. Okay. Interesting enough, I don't need to bother putting the else on here, because if this was true, it would return and would have exited the function. So there's no way it will go on to this second part unless this first part wasn't true. So because I'm returning out of here, there's no point doing one of these kind of clever constructed if-else statements. Basically what I can do is I can copy that same function again, and say if the choice is 1, I want to return paper. And there's no point now checking for 2 because I'll only get down to here if it was not 0 and it was not 1, so it must be 2 because that's my only other option. So down here I can just return scissors. Okay, so now when I call my function, it has a return value, which means when it comes back up here, when I call random choice, rather than this now printing as it just did before, it now returns a value. So this random function will become one of these. So to test it, I could just print that value for now. So I'm going to do it that way around. So I'm printing whatever random choice returns. Oh, lost my code there. Let's run that. So we've got our rock, paper, scissors. Oh, rock, rock, rock. So that wasn't particularly impressive, was it? Let's run it again. Paper, 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 scissors. Doesn't look very random, does it? Let's run it again. Paper, 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 scissors. Oh, hang on. There's our run. It's down the bottom there. Rock, rock, scissors, paper. Okay, so this trouble with random numbers. When you expect them to be completely random, they're not, and we've got 3 rocks in a row. Well, that's just the nature of random numbers. So you can see that basically our first function here that we've coded, our random choice, when we call it, will return randomly either rock or paper or scissors. So that's our first function coded. Okay, so the next function we want to do is get the user's choice. This doesn't take any data and it should choose whichever hand the player wants. So let's have a look at how we're going to code that. So for sake of brevity, I've just pasted a little bit in here. So first thing we do is we say def get user's choice. It doesn't take any arguments in. We then get it to print what the options are. Now, if you've not seen it before, this triple quoted notation is really clever. It only works with single quotes, and it just allows you to enter a block of text over several lines, and that whole block will be printed. So that's quite neat, really. But obviously what we want to do now is we want to get the user to enter their choice. So we're going to say user's choice is assigned. We're going to call the input function, and we're going to pass it the string enter 1, 2 or 3. Okay, so user's choice now will have 1, 2 or 3, whatever the user typed in, and we can quite simply say if user's choice is assign the value 1. Now I'm going to leave it like that. That's actually a mistake. We'll see what's happened in a minute, why that doesn't work. So if it's 1, what was 1? It was rock, wasn't it? So we want to return rock. Then obviously the other option that the user might have put in is they might have chosen option 2, which we know was paper, and oops, spelled return wrong. That would have thrown me an error. Spotted that one. Spotted it because I realised it was the wrong colour and something just didn't look right. And the last option, well, I don't even need to text this because if it's not 1, it's not 2, it must have been 3. So I can just return scissors. Okay, so that's my get user choices function. So from in main now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to assign the value user's choice, or I'm going to call it the user's hand actually, is going to get whatever this function returns, which is get user's choice, and it didn't take any parameters. And then now I'm just going to print it out to see that it actually worked. Now you'll see we seem to be doing quite a bit of typing here, which is just for testing. Well, that's kind of the nature of programming, really. It's well worth spending this time getting each of the functions right and making sure they work before we delve into trying to glue the whole thing together. So let's just run this. So it should run main, call our function get user's choice, and that should return user's hand. That should be returning rock, paper or scissors, and then we should print the text user's hand equals and then whatever the user's hand was. More astute amongst you may have already spotted the error, but we're going to let it run anyway. Then we're going to go and find it. Great, so it printed our choices, so that was our triple quoted text. It's then printed the prompt for me. Yeah, I probably should have added a space after the 3, I'll correct that. So I'm going to go for option 1, which was my rock. And, oh, user's hand was scissors. Well, there you go, that failed miserably, didn't it? So what went wrong? We typed in 1, but we got scissors. So I definitely didn't type 3 in, so what went wrong? Let's just have a look at the code. These are a bit more difficult to debug. It certainly, because it returned rock, it obviously, it returned scissors, it obviously got down here, so it didn't find this match here where user's choice was 1. I could start debugging in here, but just to save time, we'd find out that it was definitely in here, so it hadn't matched it to a 1, so there's something wrong there. For those who can spot it straight away, what was the problem? Well, remember, input always returns a string. So if we typed 1, we got the string 1, not the number 1. So hence user's choice didn't match the number 1. It was actually would have been the string 1. So this will only work if we put quotes around it. Or I could have converted it into an integer up here. That was a possibility. I'm not sure about that. Obviously then our third option 3 should work. So let's run that again. Enter your choice, rock, paper or scissors. I forgot to put space in. Do 1 this time. Great, I got rock, which was the right one. Let's run my code again. Put 2 in. Great, I got paper. Run my code again. Put 3 in. And I get scissors. Fantastic. So that's basically written our next function, which is get user's choice, and that's giving me rock, paper or scissors. Great, onward and upward. Okay, looking to the next function in our list, we need to print the hand. So when the computer's made its random choice and you've prompted the user for their hand, you've now got the computer's hand and the player hands and the player hand. We need to print that information. So let's have a look how we would do that. So up here I've got the user's hand. I've actually referred to it as a player's hand, so I'm going to call it player's hand. I do also need to have the computer's hand in there, so we've written that function already. So computer's hand is, I call random choice. My indentation has gone a bit haywire there, so let's just get that indentation back aligned. I don't need to print that, that was just part of my testing. What I need now is a function that prints the computer's hand and the player's hand. Now I could put it here in main, but I don't know what format it looks like. So again, definitely, as we've done in our design, I'd do it in a function. Well, fortunately I've already written it, so hopefully oh no, I've lost it. Just give me 1 second. I've just got to get it back. Okay, so here we go. So I've written a function called print hand. It's taking the 2 arguments, our parameters, the computer's hand and the player's hand. So when I call it up here, these are the 2 variables I'm obviously going to pass in. It does a new line for me in prints a space, and it says the choices are in. I chose, obviously this is being the computer's hand, and you chose, never spelled chose right, no, chose is right, the player's hand. So this is going to print the information, so I need to see if this function's working. So I can take that, and notice I'm only able to copy the parameters here that we're passing in, the arguments that I'm passing in, because I've given them the same name in the function. I've called them computer hand and player hand. Up here I've called the computer hand and I've called them players hand there. So I've got to be slightly careful there, players hand. Okay, so remember, it doesn't matter that this one's the same and these are different. I suppose I should be consistent. I'm going to leave them different just to illustrate the point, because it's the actual value that's in computer's hand that's passed into the receiving argument here, computer hand, and it's a value that's in player's hand that's passed into the argument here, player hand. Okay, so let's see if this works now. Notice we won't be able to test what random sends back because it's stored in this variable, so we won't actually see that until we see it printed here. But we've tested that function, so we're pretty confident that's working. Let's run our module. So computer's made its choice. I'm going to choose 1, and choices are in. I chose scissors, you chose rock. Yeah, I chose 1, so that seems to have worked. So it looks like our print function is working. That space there is annoying me, so let's just do that. Remember, because we're using the input and we're passing text, the prompt for you to type in the input goes straight after the text. That's why it was hard up against the 3. So I've just put that extra space in there. That'll tidy that up. Let's run it one more time. So this time I'm going to choose, there's my space in there, great. I'm going to choose 3. This time they chose paper and you chose scissors. Okay, so fantastic, we've got our print function working. Okay, so the next function we want to look at is the print winner function, but to do that we need to know who the winner is. We need to test if the computer's won and we need to test if the player has won. Now it might seem a bit daft because surely if the computer's won, the answer to that is false and the player has won. Well, not so, because obviously we can have a stalemate in this game. So in the design we've chosen to do these two tests separately. Test if the computer's won, that tells me the computer wins. If the player's won, that tells me the player won. If neither of them won, then we know it's a draw. So that's why we've decided to do them differently. When we have a look at the information that these functions need, let me get there. What do we need to test if the computer's won? We need to know the computer and the player hand, and the function should return me a Boolean variable, which is true if the computer won, otherwise it's false. Obviously the test if player has won is going to be very similar because it has the same information and it returns me a Boolean value if the player has won. So they're kind of quite similar functions. So let's go on and code those. So here we are back in our code. Put this up at the top, that's where we're working at the moment. So I need a function basically to test if the computer wins, and we pass in the computer hand and the player hand. And because in this particular game there is no logic to it as such, it doesn't, you know, the number of 1, 2 or 3 that we've arbitrarily given rock, paper or scissors is really irrelevant, and there's no logical rule that says if one is alphabetically before the other it wins. The only real way to code this is to think of the 3 possible scenarios where the computer could win and write those down and just test for them. So we've written the first one here, which says if the computer's hand is rock and the player's hand is scissors, well obviously rock beats scissors, therefore the computer won, and we return the value true. So that's pretty straightforward. So what you need to do now is kind of get your thinking head on and think about what the other possible conditions are. So if the computer had paper, so if the I have to get the capitalization right. So if the computer had paper, what would it have to? What would it be to beat? So what does paper beat? Well, paper beats scissors. Because obviously, no, it doesn't. Gosh, I'm terrible here. What does paper beat? Paper beats rock. There you go. That was me, not with my thinking head on, because paper can wrap up rock. So if the computer's hand is paper, the player's hand is rock. Paper wraps up rock. Therefore, the computer wins and returns true. What's the other possibility? Scissors. So what do scissors beat? Well, scissors obviously beat paper, because scissors can cut paper, so that will return true as well. So reiterating again, when we call this function computer wins, in any of these situations, if it's rock and scissors, the computer wins. If it's paper and rock, the computer wins. Or if it's scissors and paper, the computer wins. Any of those three conditions will return true. If none of those three conditions exist, we will not have returned out of this function. So where will we be? Down the end here, and we just returned false, because obviously the computer did not win. So there's our computer wins type of function. So if you think about it, obviously we're going to write the same kind of function now, but determining if the player wins. So we obviously need our function now about our player winning, and basically it's going to be the other way around, obviously. So save me you watching me type it all in. I've got that one prepared. So here we go. We're calling player wins again with passing in the same hands, and if the computer hands is rock and the player's hand is paper, obviously paper beats rock, so the player wins and we return true. If the computer got paper but the player got scissors, again the player wins, so we return true. If the computer got scissors and the player got rock, obviously the rock blunts the scissors, so we return true. Otherwise we return false. Just to show you here a slightly different construction, just as a kind of a discussion point, here I put else, return false. And I suppose the question is, does it really matter in these two situations whether I use the else or not? The answer is no, it doesn't, because in these functions here, if we hit the if, it returns true and it exits from the function. So it would never get down here if it had executed this condition, because executing the condition actually returns it out of the function. The only real reason to use else down here is if we had some statements up here which after it had done it, it came down to do something else. So there's no real point using else here. It won't make any difference because it'll still come down to else anyway. In this particular case, I got down to the bottom, there was no other option but to return false anyway, so that did it. So in this particular case, it doesn't matter whether we use else or not. If that doesn't make sense, you probably need to draw it out and think about the possible routes that you've got through these two functions. So now having written these two functions, I just really need to test them. So back up here in our main, I'm going to print player wins, and I'm going to call the function player wins. Again, just making a note that up here actually I'd called it player's hand. So when I pass this in, I need to pass it in calling it player's hand, even though it's called player hand down there. Oh, let's put that in the wrong place. Picked up the whole def, haven't I? Didn't want that. Okay, so I'm going to print the text, player wins, then I'm going to print whatever the function returns, which I know is a boolean true or false. And I need to do the same again. But this time it is not player wins, but computer wins. And call computer wins. Okay, so this should now print out these two bits of text with the return values of the two functions, player wins and computer wins, remembering that they're just returning boolean values, true or false. So let's run our program and see where we get to now. So let's go for choice 1, see what happens. So I chose rock, you chose rock, player wins false, computer wins false. Brilliant. We were straight in there to the whole reason we'd written these two as two separate functions, because clearly in this case nobody won, so it must have been a draw. Let's run it again. Let's go for choice 1 again. I chose scissors, you chose rock, Well, obviously the rock blunts the scissors, so player wins is true. That's right, because when I got the rock and the computer wins was false, so that worked. Run it again. You can see it's a bit of a ball ache running it again because we're letting the computer randomly choose its choice. Really, to test these functions, we should call our player wins function, and we should manually pass in the different parameters that we want here. So just to illustrate how to do that, I'm not going to do it for all of it, but I might pass in rock, and I'm going to pass in paper. Okay. So what's this going to do? For player wins, I'm passing in the computer's hand as rock. I'm passing in the player's hand as paper. So the player's paper wraps up the computer's rock, so the player wins. So this should return me a true, irrespective of what I've got here. And in fact, just to save me a bit of time, what I could do is I could just hash those out, so it doesn't even do those, and it's going to go straight into player wins. And I'm expecting this to tell me, in fact, just to save a bit of time as well, I'm going to hash that one out. So testing the player wins function, passing in rock and paper. Computer's hand is rock, the player's hand is paper, so the player should win, so this should return me a true. Oh, okay, so I've obviously got something missing here. I've got too many quotes there, somehow I picked up an extra quote at the end. Don't know quite what happened there. So not an extra quote, an extra parentheses. Done it again. Ah, wasn't that? Missed off my quote. That's what it was. So I've got 2 opens, 2 closes. That looks better. I should have spotted it because the colouring was all wrong at the end. I just wasn't watching. Okay, so player wins is true. How else could I ring true if that was paper? For the computer's hand, what beats paper? Well, obviously scissors beats paper. So this should return me a true. Yeah, player wins is true. And if this was rock, obviously rock doesn't beat paper, so this should return me a false. Okay, so we get the idea. Really, we ought to exhaustively test all possibilities just to prove it works, but for brevity we won't now. So fantastic, we've written the player wins and the computer wins function. We're now getting to the point where we're going to tie all these bits together. So that'll be in the next video.